Hey there, welcome to Beta Talks, the podcast, in which we talk to friends from the development community.
I'm Rick.
And I am Oscar.
Oscar, how have you been?
I've been great, been busy. Also had some really fun days. 2 weeks ago we talked to, what was it, like 20 bets, as we call them.
Yeah.
Azure talents, so young professionals from our company. And we went through 2 client cases, both of them using .NET Stack, both of them using Azure, but completely different.
Yeah, but really completely different, right?
So one is a SaaS company born in the cloud, using all the latest stuff all the time, and the other one just moving to the cloud, but big enterprise with all kinds of other issues and a lot of infrastructure as service. But it was fun, a lot of questions, nice to get to know the group because there are new colleagues. It was a good opportunity. So
and I think it's a good thing that we actually discuss how Azure works in practice, right? Because we can learn all of the theory along the way, but we start learning how stuff actually works when we start working with it.
You start learning the moment you start making mistakes. If everything goes right the first way, you learned nothing. So we had some fun war stories for them, I think.
Oscar, who's our friend of the day?
Our friend of the day is Henry Bain.
Henry is an independent architect and developer from the Netherlands. He enjoys working with software development teams to create and deliver great software. His interests include the Azure Cloud, Agile, DevOps, software architecture, and the design and implementation of testable and maintainable software. Besides his work, he is a conference speaker at international conferences, is the author of 2 books, and creates online training courses for Pluralsight. For his work in the community, he has been awarded the Microsoft MVP Award since 2019. To follow Henry, you can go to his blog or find him on Twitter at Henry_Bain. Henry, welcome.
Welcome, Henry.
Hey, gentlemen. Good morning.
So, how are you?
I'm fine. Still getting used to, talking to somebody at this early hour. I'm your very, very traditional geek. I don't really get started before lunch. And for the listeners, it's even before 10 right now. So I'm struggling, but hanging on.
Sorry, but great for you to make time of your night rest.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
And your busy schedule because you're doing a lot of things right now, right?
Yes, juggling a lot of things right now. I think everybody is, towards the end of the season. Conferences, events, everything seems to be happening in June this year.
Yeah, all the real events started again. So a lot of traveling for a lot of people, I think.
Yes, I think so as well. I'm actually quite fortunate that most of the things that I've been doing are in the Netherlands or close to the Netherlands. I still haven't seen a plane in 2.5 years. I've done everything by train so far. Also feeling very good about sustainability from that point of view.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yes, but I've spent hours and hours in the train again, which is great, actually. Being under the people, seeing people in 3D again.
Except instead of those metaverse avatars, right?
I'm not doing that.
No, I'm waiting for them to get legs.
I'm still curious to see if that will work out in the future, honestly.
Well, this is actually something that you touch upon that I think all of us have found out the last couple of months, or maybe the last 2 years, that although virtual events work, when there's too many, or it stops working, or at least you kind of get tired of how it works with those virtual events. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, I would agree. So I think as a participant, so as somebody listening to virtual events, it becomes a little bit of a lull. You don't have that variation where you talk to people in the hallway, then you listen to a very well-known, very famous international speaker, which has a very polished talk, and then you walk over to somebody who is more local and but does a live demo for a smaller audience. You don't have that variation, I feel, listening to online things. And another thing is it's way too tempting to do email on the side or Slack or Teams or whatever your poison is. Mm-hmm. So you don't really zone out of your day-to-day job, detracting from the actual learning and thinking experience that you normally would get from a conference. And as a speaker, I found it very hard, and I've barely done it because you're sending your energy into a black hole and you don't get a lot of response, which is what I enjoy. So yeah, completely different and not sustainable for me at least.
Yeah, and I totally agree on that one because, like you said, most of the times when you go to conferences, the real value of the conferences is in the hallway talks, right? In the people you meet in the hallway, in the short conversations you have there, and the possibility you have to go to maybe even a team member of the product team of stuff that you're working with or working on. That you lose that with all the virtual events. And although quite a few events have tried to pull that off even virtually, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I would agree. But I think the other angle is also that you don't get, completely away from your work, especially when you're working as us in a profession where a lot of your work is about thinking creatively about problems. You will need downtime. You need time away to not just ponder the problem currently at hand, but also think about what we're going to do next week, next month, next year. And to me, that happens much more easily when I'm away from the work, when I'm taking a walk, when I'm talking to somebody else. And that's also a thing that I missed in the online conferences, that getting away from the day-to-day thing.
Yeah, it's like at the office, if you go into a planning meeting or a retrospective and everyone brings their laptop, in the end, everyone will see their email coming in and like it doesn't work. Like close that thing off. It's the same of like trying to really refocus on something new at a conference. You have the traveling, you have some downtime, and indeed a completely new crowd where you normally wouldn't want to engage with that quickly because, indeed staring into a black hole, you might get some questions, but that's it.
And downtime is the thing that actually gives us creativity. So, for example, if you see a lot of people in the train, everybody is looking at their phone. It's very likely they're killing their creativity because they can't do nothing anymore for more than 3 seconds. Just look around. People do nothing for 3 seconds, and then they're like, out of a reflex, they pull their phone and start looking at it. But not doing anything, having no point in your action is very good for creativity and problem solving, at least, I believe.
Yeah, sometimes I find myself staring out the window because I have this problem that I need to figure out. And then with all of the distractions around you, it's hard to really think about that kind of stuff. So then I move myself towards the window and just stare outside for a bit. And then I think it's also an XKCD, but I'm not really sure where it actually says that somebody who's looking out the windows is working really hard. Well, sometimes in our work that really is the case, or can be the case.
Yes, well, my first employer, a story goes they once got on a bill from a consultant, and he billed 4 hours of typing a report and 96 hours of thinking. And he actually put that on the bill, which was agreed upon, but still it was apparently hilarious when they got the bill. So he really, had the guts to put that time on the bill, which is not very common.
No, it isn't. But
like in the end, it is real. Like I made a remark this week to someone. It's like even if you would, I don't know, type with one pinky all day, and you would constantly write code, you would do more than any developer I know. End of the day, like that's ridiculous. You don't need the super fast input or anything because the typing is just the typing in the end.
And that's the reason why measuring performance by lines of code is the worst way of measuring performance, right?
Unless you count the lines of code deleted, because then I'm really happy with you.
The best code is code you didn't write. I totally agree on that one.
Have you ever seen that in practice?
You mean counting the code deleted?
No, counting code written. Of course.
I've seen some, but that is a long time ago. I'm also very old by now. No, but
I'm glad you said it yourself.
Yeah. No, I was. I need to be ahead of you this time. But I have seen people that looked at code churn graphs, especially the early days. That you could pull that from repositories and stuff, and like, what kind of amount of work went in there? And I was actually at a customer not too long ago, helping them out, and they wanted some KPIs, and there was clearly a manager asking for getting more performance out of their dev teams. They had 4 teams, and I recommended to count the amount of releases. Start with that KPI. It's like, how many things are you pushing out? How many times? Don't care about how small or big it is, but see if that increases, because if that's the factor, people are actually shipping the whole thing, they will get smaller increments, and I guarantee you, in the end, you will you will do more because of that. It's not the amount of work you put in, because I pulled open their code repositories, and I saw like 900 dead branches from the past 4 years. And I was like, yeah, that's where all your work is, but it's not coming out.
Yeah.
So don't push them to write code or throw new items at them. Just start measuring the output. Once that bottleneck is gone, you can go to the next one. But it's never the amount of work picked up.
No.
Still fairly common though. I recently talked to 2 developers from 2 different companies, and you see that culture thing happening under pressure from, like you said, management to take aboard more things. And then you get this culture where people go over the list of things to be done, and everything is in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is taken a look at, and nothing is getting done. I think the quote is, start finishing and stop starting.
Mm-hmm.
Is really applicable here. But that's I do see in practice, unfortunately. Way too many things in parallel.
Yeah, it will stack, right? Like even though you try to do it right, in the end something doesn't get finished because there's a bottleneck, there's some impediment outside your control. People will tend to start the next thing while they normally would need to take more ownership or more control to push that thing through. And in some cases, I also see stuff is in production. Yeah, we have feature toggles now, so we shipped, but it isn't shipped until that toggle is on and we're getting some feedback. But with like 100 different feature toggles in production, you have really complex problems still waiting for you, because at some point you won't know what's on and what's not on. So you can drive it really far, and at some point it is removing the lines of code or dismissing stuff you actually don't need will help you a lot. And just get that loop fully going. And it's not the amount of features or work or whatever, but really get small pieces out there.
It's tough. My current engagement, we're building a new team, so we're spending a lot of time on the culture and the way of working. And the problem is, it feels so good to start something else when you have to wait. Nobody likes to say, "I'm just waiting for 20 minutes for the build to complete and my colleague to take a quick look before I push this to production and then continue drinking coffee." Nobody wants to do that. Everybody wants to say, "Yeah, I'm just waiting on some feedback." But meanwhile, it feels so good to be busy and to show your teammates that you're trying to do a good job. While you're actually indeed optimizing for your own productivity and not for team outcomes. And I think that's what we have to learn, that, waiting 5, 10, maybe 20 minutes to be able to continue your work at hand is way more valuable to the team than being very busy on an individual level. But it's a conflict between the actual measurable outcomes and how we feel about what we're doing.
Yeah, and now like some teams are a bit more at the office. So if teams are together, I would recommend like waiting for something. So I push something to test and the build takes a while. Just slide over to your colleague and pair with them a bit or something like that instead of picking up brand new thing.
Yeah, because then also you got that context switch going, and that kills it for you. I mean, you gotta completely let go of what you restarted once the build finishes, and then you need to reinvest in getting to know the situation again of what the build was actually doing. So, yeah, as far as that's concerned, I agree on that one. However, it is kind of hard to just sit there and say, "Well, I'm waiting" with your coffee, and then again the compiling XKCD, which everybody knows, when the 2 developers are sort of fighting. Why are you doing nothing? Nope, my code's compiling. Well, that's something that we need to actually pick up, right? We need to say, well, my code's on its way to either a PR or going to production, so I just need to wait for a bit.
Yep.
Henry, one of the things that stood out in some of the information that you sent us was the fact that currently you are working on getting a next book out, right?
Yes.
Well, tell us a bit about that book.
About the book. So it's not just me. I'm working together with Eduard Kelholz and Erwin Staal, 2 co-authors. All of us have written about 1/3 of the book and, given our opinion about the other 2/3. So that's one of the things that I really liked about writing this book, that I didn't have to do it alone, which is really a pain in the backside. So I will never write anything alone. Again, teamwork is much better than working alone. And the book is about native infrastructure as code things for Azure. I say things because, of course, we start with ARM templates and Bicep, the real infrastructure as code. But we also try to touch upon the ecosystem around it. So, for example, template specs, which allow you to create an ARM template and store it as a resource in Azure so that others can reuse your template. We discuss policy, Azure policy, the way that you can apply guide rails, either mandatory or advisory, to your Azure environment that will help others write better infrastructure definitions. What else do we talk about? We talk about testing ARM templates and infrastructure deployments. We talk about deployment stacks, which is a new feature that has been announced for a while, but is still in private preview, which is going to be very exciting because I think the book is now officially off to the presses.
Okay.
And there is a small chapter that touches a little bit upon deployment stacks in there with approval of the product group. But it is still in private preview. And it's probably going to be a race condition what hits the market first, the public preview of deployment stacks or the book. So it might be that we are writing about something that isn't even available to the general population yet. And
that's actually pretty impressive that you have something as, I'm going to say it, something as relatively old school as a printed book to be faster than a public preview of a service in something as fast moving as Azure.
Thank you. But I think one of the things that we maybe all misunderstand, Microsoft, I think, is very agile and reactive to demand when it comes to Azure. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of planning happening.
Oh, true.
And things that we see haven't been thought up 3 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, 9 weeks ago. Some things have been in the works for years. But yes, we were very lucky to be included. I was in the private preview right from the start. And I did what every Dutch person does. I just tried and asked if it was allowed to write about it. Ja heb je, nee kan je krijgen. We say in Dutch. You have a no, you can always try to get a yes. Whereas, as I've been taught, you can ask everything, just be prepared for a no. Yeah. But we got a yes. So thanks, Brian, if you're listening.
But that is definitely cool because I haven't seen the feature. I don't know what it is. And what separates it from the rest of the infrastructure as code, or what provides it extra?
So one of the things that you want to do when you continue with infrastructure as code is that you don't only want to create new resources, you also want to update or at least guarantee the state of existing resources to be the same as you want it to be. And maybe at some point you also want to remove resources that you don't need anymore. Let's say I have a template that describes a service bus and a number of topics and queues. And then a new queue is added. It's created in Azure when I deploy the template. That's fine. But then let's say I don't need the queue anymore. And I remove it from my template. It doesn't get automatically removed in Azure as well when I redeploy.
No, that is the ARM and the Bicep problem at the moment. Yeah, you can do a full deployment, but then it removes everything that you didn't put
specify,
in there. Yeah.
Yes, so when you do it, there is indeed complete deployment mode. And what it does, it looks at the target scope of your deployment, and it finds everything in the target scope. So let's assume that's a resource group. And it will compare that against the description of your template. So if you're deploying 2 different templates to the same resource group, or you're manually making changes, which you never should, you can never use the complete deployment mode because you're unexpectedly removing resources that you don't want to remove.
Yeah, where did the database go?
Yes, so anything with state is the worst kind of mistake that you can make. Compute you can restore, but state is terrible. So make backups, test them. So we said something adult.
Put resource locks on things that are really important.
Yes, everything with state. So what the deployment stack is, it's going to be the solution for this problem. The deployment stack is a resource in itself, and it contains another list of resources. And basically, it's a custom grouping that operates separate of the resource group subscription management group. hierarchy. So I create a grouping myself. Let's call it my application. And then within that grouping, I create an app service plan and an app service and a service bus and a service bus namespace and a service bus queue. And then whenever I deploy my template with the deployment stack and in the deployment stack, the resources, I say what to do with the resources that were the previous version of the stack and not in the one that I'm deploying right now. I can either detach them, which means that they will no longer be part of my deployment stack, but will be retained in Azure, or I can purge them, which means that they will also be removed in Azure. And as I'm now relying on my own custom grouping, the deployment stack, instead of the implicit grouping by resource group, I can be much more confident I don't remove or delete anything that I actually need, or even worse, somebody else needs that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, because that's the case most of the time, right? Somebody else potentially added something in your resource group that you're not aware of, and then you don't want to accidentally remove that.
Yes, and now in theory that shouldn't happen because there is this recommendation: group resources by their shared lifetime in the same resource group.
True.
So
that's the theory, yeah.
but it gets tricky when you have, for example, I don't know, a centralized team that provides me with a VNet in a resource group, and then as a workload team, I want to put a private endpoint on that VNet. And I put that in the same resource group because that feels very natural to me to group all the networking resources. Ta-da! You have mixed
and
deployments.
that one is a perfect example because you want the network team to be able to control the resources, and you probably manage your permissions through the resource group. So it is not even that weird that you're in that situation.
No, so there are enough edge cases where this becomes as a problem. Automatically generated resources is another one. When you create a secondary of something, sometimes it gets automatically created, and you cannot manually manage the resource, but the primary resource does it. So a good example doesn't come to mind.
I think Synapse Analytics might be interesting, since if you add Synapse Analytics and you add the serverless pool, I think it automatically adds a management resource group where it adds some supporting services.
Yeah, but also in Log Analytics, it creates a resource group if you start storing your queries and stuff like that. There's some automatic experiences there.
But this actually sounds like a decent solution to, let's call it a problem that we have currently with ARM and Bicep. But I would like to maybe also dive a little bit more into infrastructure as code in general, since a lot of companies where I have advised them to start using Bicep, and as far as I'm concerned, start using Bicep as early on in the project as possible, since if you manage everything through infrastructure as code, you're better off. But there have been 3 different customers in 2 weeks' time who have all asked me, will Microsoft keep supporting Bicep? Because it's relatively new. Is this something that we should really heavily invest in? And then my answer always is, in the end, it's just ARM, right? And ARM is everywhere as far as Azure goes. So if you invest in Bicep, even in the worst case scenario where they would stop supporting it, you could just generate an ARM template based on your Bicep and work from there. But it's really front and center as far as infrastructure as code within Azure goes, right?
I think so, yeah. So one thing that comes to mind is people asking, will this be supported for 20 years? They're trying to hang on to a world that doesn't exist anymore.
True. Nothing is supported for 20 years anymore, probably.
At least not guaranteed to be supported.
No, but knowing Microsoft, at least the next 7.
True, yeah, true.
But just look at the rate of change that comes with .NET nowadays and how versions are going out of support. And I know it can be tough to keep up, but remember everyone, .NET Core 3.1 is going out of support. I think December 13th, top of mind this year.
Yep.
Upgrade everything. So that rate of change is constant. So maybe it's the wrong question. But to still answer it, yes, I don't think Bicep is going away. As you already said, Rick, Bicep is transpiled into the traditional ARM template, which makes your eyes bleed because it's a lot of JSON. And that JSON is indeed submitted to the core API of the control plane of the whole of Azure. the Azure Resource Manager. It's that REST API that sits in front of all the individual APIs of all the product groups and product teams in Microsoft. So that's going away.
They're not going to change that again.
No,
we had the classic resources, of course, but I think since end 2013, the ARM, the resource manager is everything. So the ARM is indeed just a manifestation of that. You cannot replace that.
No, because our resource manager, I mean, if you work with Azure CLI or the Cloud Shell or PowerShell, Azure Commands or the Azure Portal, or I mean, anything you can do with resources in Azure, you're going through that management API.
Actually, most of the things when you create them in the portal using the forbidden clicky click, you can still go to the deployment tab on the resource group and see that it's actually just triggering a deployment to ARM.
Yeah, they're all just wizards building an ARM template for you, right?
Not all of them. There are exceptions, but the grand majority is. There are still places where APIs are invoked directly.
Okay.
Well, probably at least for all the classic services.
Well, can you still create what classic service still around there that you can create new?
I think you can still create new cloud services, classics,
Yes.
and storage accounts probably. The classic
Create a
storage
new
account?
classic storage account?
I think so. I think we can still create classic storage accounts. Let's find out after.
I updated my last one a couple of weeks ago, somewhere in the corner.
Only a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, I had like 50 or something in one account. Like,
Wow.
Okay, now I need to do it. I trust them.
Very retro of you. Storage accounts, I don't know, but cloud services, you can still create them. And so when it comes to length of support, if there is a solid customer base, Microsoft will do its best to support those customers.
Yeah, true.
And I think cloud services is a very good example because we are now, I think, 8 or 9 years into the ARM journey. And they were still running on ASM up to, I don't know, a year ago or something. You still had to convert them manually.
Yeah, and then now finally they have the old ones actually called Classic, and you can also create new ones. Have you looked at other infrastructure as code solutions apart from the Azure native ones? Because one of the things I tend to hear as far as, for instance, Pulumi or Terraform goes, is the fact that they use a local state file, which potentially could give you issues if somebody else does something that's not depicted in your local state file. Have you looked at other infrastructure as code options?
I myself haven't. I know Erwin has done quite a few things with Terraform. So when he's in the audience and questions come about other things, I always refer to him, which is very helpful. But not really. And the reason is I only do Azure, exclusively Azure. And Bicep is so closely integrated with Azure. I believe it is a natural choice because you don't have to onboard another supplier or another tool outside of your existing ecosystem. Now, if you're working at a small company or a startup, that doesn't sound like a problem. I just download Terraform, install it on my laptop, and weehoo! But if you're in a big company, getting a new supplier onboarded is a very costly and painful exercise 9 out of 10 times. So I think that's a very good argument to stick with Bicep and not look at other solutions like Pulumi, Terraform, Farmer, etc. But there are use cases where those tools do make more sense. Absolutely. It's not a silver bullet.
Yeah, they don't exist, silver bullets.
No, we know that by now. Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
Do you know what time it is?
Is it time for a totally random question?
It's time for a totally random question. Henry, what was cool when you were young, but isn't so cool now?
Wow, so nobody told me that this would happen.
Otherwise it wouldn't be random.
Right? Yeah. Now, this is a bit of a technology podcast, so maybe it's a hard question because we were never really cool.
Hey, we could talk about technology that was cool once, but isn't now.
Oh, true.
I don't know what to call in English. Do you call them as yo-yos in English as well, or spinners?
Yo-yos.
No,
Yo-yos.
spinners are the things that you hold in your hand, right? With that's a spinner. But
Like I think every 6 years yo-yos revive, right?
I don't know, but yo-yos were really cool when I was a teenager. And we did all kinds of tricks with them, and you bought oh, this one is heavier, so you can do better tricks. And then you bought the same model as somebody else had, and we did all kinds of tricks with them.
And then you had lights in them, right?
Yes,
But not when I was a kid.
You're not that old.
So I think looking back on it, it's like, why the F did we find that funny or cool or weird?
I could have spent my time programming.
Yeah, I think that's about the same time that indeed I wrote my first line of code.
Yeah, you started at a young age.
Yes, I did a little bit of fiddling with web development when I was attending middle school. I think like a lot of people in our profession, I created my first website using a book about PHP that had a lot of very insecure examples in the first half. And I tried them all, and then I stopped reading because I thought I knew it all. And then some HTML and CSS. And then I got bored because we are you familiar with developer design? That something works and is very handy in the eyes of a developer, but when a real business user comes in, he looks at it and says, "What's this?"
Oh yes,
Yeah.
Oh yes.
So
You ask
I
me to
excel
design
at it.
something. You get the button. You get the input. It all works, and nobody wants to use it because it doesn't look.
Yeah, and
fancy,
if another
right?
developer sees it, it almost sees the code behind it straight away because like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is
Yes.
doing that.
Yes, CRUD operations for the win. So I'm very good at developer design, which is the reason that I stopped building front ends mostly. I don't do any front end right now.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to go back to Bicep. If like you're the specialist. You wrote the book. Let's say that. I found out like in the early days of Bicep, I did some preview work in there, and your only target was a resource group. Later on, I saw you could do something from subscription level and gain some things. And I was at a customer doing some preparation for a like, big rollout of actually a lift and shift. So a lot of infrastructure as service. But they needed a lot of management groups and subscriptions. And someone said, can you write the Bicep for that and with your team? And it's like, can you actually create a subscription with Bicep? And I found out you can create management groups with Bicep. And I didn't know it went up that. Did it add on? Like, is that also the resource manager that you're talking to? Because to me, in the beginning, it was like Bicep starts working from the moment you also have ARM. So resource group is your...
So you push something into
entry.
a resource group. Yeah. I did know that you could target subscription level as well, but if you can even create management groups.
You can create the subscription itself, I found out. So
Yes, in certain situations. So if you go way back, the subscription was the highest order element in Azure.
Yeah.
And you can also see that in the resource IDs, right? It is management.azure.com/subscription/GUID and then yada, yada, yada. If you look at what a management group is, its ID actually looks like as if it is a resource in a subscription. Something like /provider/Microsoft.management and then the name of the management group. So the way management groups are, you can see actually from their implementation that they kind of bolted on top of them because people were creating more and more subscriptions and needed more layers of management. So Bicep works for those management groups for everyone because it just does. For creating subscriptions, you have an interesting extra problem, except for creating the resource for which you need authorization on the management group that you're adding the subscription to. The subscription is also the boundary for billing and invoicing. So you need also have authorizations to create something that's going to incur cost. So that's called a billing account in Azure. And I reckon that most of the developers don't have ever seen that kind of thing because that's often more on the finance or business side. And to have that authorization is very limited. Not everybody has it. And only under certain conditions you can invoke the creation of a subscription using those two authorizations combined. And I think that's only when you have an MCA contract with Microsoft. So if you're on a pay-as-you-go credit card kind of subscription, or when you're on a student construction, that's not possible. Only when you're using an MCA. And maybe when you're on a CSP construction, which I don't know anything about, but maybe the two of you do.
Well, I've been in a few of those situations where I needed to handle the billing and set up accounts. But like last time I did it from scratch was a while ago. Still the old, almost half broken account portal that like had a lot of buttons that didn't work and like was so odd. But that was there when the old portal was there. Come on.
Yeah, and we do CSP from the project side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the times, Oscar and I are at customers, so that means, well, as far as I'm concerned, most of the times it's credit card or under an enterprise agreement, but that's it.
Yeah, and this stuff is already there 9 out of 10 times when you're entering. But now where I was, they wanted to expand it, and it was fun to actually see. It was like I'll check it just in case, and just a world opened for me because I never seen that on that level you could do that. But it also makes me a bit nervous because you also say, like, this got bolted on, and it feels like that. Like, if you ever build a system and you made the decisions like, okay, this is the root thing that everything hangs on, which in my eyes was always the subscription in Azure. From there, the technical stuff starts. It feels a bit odd if you now have the management groups and you can have like 5 layers of them, and this stuff starts happening. It's like it feels a bit indeed bolted on. Like,
but you need to. If you're looking at larger organizations, I'm a big believer in subscription democratization.
Mm-hmm.
So using a subscription per workload or a subscription per product or a subscription per team, even maybe. I really favor per product, not per team, because teams move, products rarely do. And if you adopt that model and you're working in a larger organization, you can end up with hundreds of subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
And you will need some overarching way for governing all of those, especially when it comes to applying policies or applying authorizations for people that have a non-functional responsibility that runs across all these subscriptions, something like networking or security or cost management. You really need that level above. So I really understand why they have done it. And it is curating into a more and more workable experience over the years.
Yeah, I definitely saw the benefit of it. The implementation, indeed, you can wonder how big the change at Azure was to make this work. But indeed, what you also see, you don't want the production policies that you need to be specific. Like, let's say you create like 50 subscriptions because you go towards that model. You want your dev teams to also experiment with new types of systems and stuff like that, but you want to prevent them creating resources in production with not a production SLA on it. So you will have 2 big like branches in your management groups to say, well, this is like playground and the other one is real stuff. I definitely see the benefit of it, but this is such a one-off creation, the subscriptions and billing and stuff. Like you won't put that in a build pipeline, would you?
It depends on the size of the organization. So I've been involved in building an Azure. I still call it an Azure foundation from scratch. I think we would nowadays call it a cloud adoption framework approach. And we did everything from the pipeline for a number of reasons. So first of all, we were all coming in as temporary on the job, either through a contract role or an intermediate party. That means that we were all going to be gone at some point. So then having everything in source control.
That's the best documentation.
Is a very good documentation of how stuff should be. And also allows you to, annotate changes with why. The other reason is it was an extremely highly regulated environment. Lives depend on the software there. What you want to then do is have a lot of organizational controls, like nobody has access to production, period. And to make that possible, you can say nobody make changes in the portal except for the pipelines. And then you can, for example, make a policy that says, on my production environments, I should not have any airbag assignment where the target is a personal account, but we only allow SPNs. So we had that in production. So even if you were to temporarily assign yourself access as an individual, you would get denied. We did allow groups because you need to have some kind of escape policy. But everything else came from the pipeline. Even the things that we thought we would probably just create 1 or 2 times, so that we have just one approach for everything. So there we did it. And I worked at a very large bank. And they also used subscription democratization. And when I say a very large bank, you have to think thousands of teams. So possibly thousands or even tens of thousands of application components that you all want to constrain in some kind of namespace thingy that allows you to manage access rights, billing, and throw away independently of anything else, meaning subscription. So they actually had a process for requesting and delivering subscriptions to teams. They had a product team, an internal product team, that as a product had pre-configured Azure subscriptions. So those are 2 instances that I know about for creating subscriptions from a pipeline.
Yeah, if that's the level that where you're working at, then I can totally see the value of having everything inside of a pipeline, parameterize it, and make sure that you push it from there. Because, well, everything that eliminates manual labor eliminates potential issues.
And it delivers a lot of compliance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be the actual argument in enterprises. Being non-compliant or manually compliant or prove every time you are compliant can be very, very expensive. If I can prove that my mechanism for making changes is compliant, I don't have to prove that my environment is compliant. I just have to prove the checks and balances. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're going to make some... they're going to take a look at your actual outcomes, of course. But it's an approach that worked there. But you need to have considerable size for this to be worthwhile.
I think so, yeah. Henry, is there anything we've missed or you'd like to get back to or you'd like to add?
And this is where I plug my book that you can buy on Amazon.
You should, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we will add a link to the book in the description of this episode because, I'm already looking forward to that one. So we will be adding it. But please take the time you need to plug that book.
So what's it called?
I've written 2 books. The first one is Implementing Azure DevOps Solutions, which is intended to be a rough preference for the AZ 400 exam, which talks you all the way through from continuous integration to how do you watch your stuff after deployment in production on the Azure platform using Azure and Azure DevOps. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to say it. There's going to be a second edition of that book. There are going to be new authors that write a number of new chapters, so it's going to be completely updated to the contents of the AZ 400 exams.
But you said, I'm just going to say it.
Going
to say it. So does that mean that we have a scoop now?
You have a scoop, yes.
Wow, nice.
And the other book, it's called Infrastructure as Code using Bicep and ARM templates. It's also available on... And not on Amazon yet, but only on the side of Manning. It's still officially in early access, but it's off to the presses, so it will be released soon. And to give you another scoop, there are going to be 2 forwards for that book. The first one is going to be written by somebody who's part of the product team that creates Bicep and the Azure Research Manager.
Okay.
And the other forward is going to be written by somebody who is quite senior in the Microsoft staff.
He's making it really like now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want to know who, just look the book up. When you look it up, of course, I wouldn't mind if you also bought it.
Okay. We will add links to those books in the episode. And now I'm really curious who those 2 people are. I have a general idea, but I'm not really sure yet. So we'll see.
I have a short list that comes to mind that I would really love to have as a forward in there.
I can imagine. So
really cool.
Again, the tip is don't dream, just ask.
Yeah, we found that out as well. So that's something.
But that's some guest we will have on the podcast that is quite senior.
Okay, we're
maybe
drifting.
It's the same one.
We're drifting off into fan being starstruck and fanboying over.
Hey, we want to thank you so much for your time. It was a blast having you.
My pleasure. It was great being here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to Beta Talks, the podcast. We publish a new episode every 2 weeks.
You can find us on all the major streaming platforms like Spotify and iTunes.
See you next time.
Bye.